to Mind Unveiled. The ancients are typically perceived as being primitive in the mainstream, as if they were cavemen or something, and everything they achieved was just a matter of manual labor. The technologies of the past were purposefully hidden, and if they do decide to cover this topic, it's always some mystery or it has to do with aliens. If one was to look into the matter, it would become evident that the ancient builders of the past possessed advanced technology. So most of us have heard of the theories about how the Pyramid of Giza is some type of generator, or Pumapunku and the precise precision of the angles when cutting a stone, or the Ellora caves in India where it seems the creators possess some type of stone cutting technology. It's as if this was simple for them. Why else would they spend so much time decorating with ornate details? We don't see anything like this being constructed in the modern day, and if it was, it'd be done with cheap materials. The two main theories are that either these were constructed by aliens or advanced ancestors. The aliens belief is really just a fetish for sci-fi that's a relatively new concept to the human race. On the other hand, advanced ancestors are referenced in the lore of many ancient philosophers and myths. This is not a new idea. The concept of Atlantis, the Golden Age, and the Flood is at the root of almost every ancient myth. Now, we can find references to advanced technologies in ancient lore from around the world, but we'll get to that. I'm sure that many are willing to accept that Atlantis was the real deal, but many still have never considered that this technology may have existed in our culture much more recent than we're led to believe. Researcher Graham Hancock would date this culture to the Younger Dryas period, about 12,000 years ago. Well, what if it wasn't that long ago, more like 1,000 or 2,000 years ago? And this tech has carried on even to our modern age. None of this technology is new. The story of many modern technologies are fabricated, like photography, airplanes, electricity, or even computers. But this tech we have today is baby stuff to what the ancients were using. This is just stuff for our entertainment, for our comfort. The ancients possessed powerful EMF technology, which was used for free ether energy and had the capabilities of tapping into other dimensions. Ether was commonly accepted in science until about 100 years ago. Then, atomism took over, the attempt to explain everything in nature with immeasurable substance. It's now heresy to even mention the ether or free energy in science. You'd be ridiculed and most likely lose your position if you were taking that stance professionally. The history of electricity has been distorted and manipulated. Most of us are willing to accept that Atlantis had advanced tech, but still believe in the traditional mainstream version of history. This video is going to cover how history is being deliberately distorted, how it was rewritten by the victors, and how the most famous cities that we now inhabit belong to an advanced civilization from around as early as 300 years ago. A civilization that possessed advanced EMF technologies. We will go over the BS story of electricity, atomism and anti-science, and advanced technologies of the past. Distorted history. We start off with Atlantis. That seems to be a good starting point for most people. There are many people who are totally fine with exploring this concept. Even mainstream media promotes it. It could be like the ancient aliens theory in which Atlantis was really an alien city. Others think of Atlantis like Graham Hancock presents it. The thing about that is, I know that Graham Hancock is not exactly mainstream, but I'm seeing millions of people look into his type of work and are completely fascinated or are willing to accept it as a possible reality. But the thing is, these ideas that Atlantis was 20,000 years ago or whatever, it still follows suit with the idea of mainstream history and it being completely valid. That these structures are a result of tens and thousands of years of erosion, as if any human on Earth has lived long enough to validate that point. It basically still assumes that the story of Samaria, Egypt, Greece, and Rome still happened as the mainstream suggests, just that they were developed long after Atlantis. I actually think it's great that he's talking about these things because we're slowly starting to picture the ancients in a different way. The idea that recent history has been manipulated is not really an idea entertained by the mainstream. I mean, it's recently been gaining traction, but it's still not largely known about or understood. Many people know about Atlantis, yet not many have looked into the idea of Tartaria, alternative US history, etheric technologies of the past 300 years, or the idea that there are controllers at play. History is written by the winners. Now, there's no way for me to fully explain everything precisely in one video, so this is more like a cliff notes, so that we can expand this topic to be understood by a larger audience. To put it briefly and short, in the US, there was existing an advanced civilization of humans who were constructing an advanced architecture and etheric EMF technologies. They use atmospheric static electric collecting devices all over the buildings. We're talking about a civilization that existed globally around 300 years ago. Then all of a sudden the new church took over, the anti-church of science and reason, the same reason that led to property, banks, ego, and self-destruction. The modern story of history is a movement of civilization from east to west. I'll try to have some annotations that you can click on that'll bring you to some videos on our channel with more explanation, but basically, this is the fraud of history. It doesn't explain why there are global similarities in culture from around the world. We all developed similar concepts for language, lore, shamanism, agriculture, architecture, art, and dancing. The isolation theory is the widely accepted view, meaning none of these ancient cultures had any communication with each other. But obviously the idea of a global ancient civilization has re-emerged recently thanks to people like Graham Hancock, Brian Forster, and many others. So the idea of Atlantis completely blows isolation theory and mainstream history away. This is still nonsense to the modern scientific standard that schools and universities teach. To accept or even explore these ideas destroys everything modern academia teaches. History books would have to be rewritten, our whole understanding of reality would be a lie, and that's just too much for most of us right now. Many of us can accept that Atlantis existed. It was destroyed by a major flood, a reset, and according to Graham Hancock, 12,000 years ago, roughly, after the fall of Atlantis, what happens? There was a global cataclysm, a flood consuming most of the world. Then, there were the survivors who kept the knowledge of the Golden Age sciences and principles of civilization. These people knew that the cataclysm would come, possibly using the knowledge of the stars or divination, and they were saved like the story of Noah. A group of survivors landed in Ireland and northern Spain. I recommend looking into the Irish origins of civilization by Michael Tarsarian for people who may be new to this topic. This explains the ancient Irish Celtic etymological roots of all languages, the suppression of Irish history, and the demonization of red hair. I covered this in the first video we ever posted, but if you look up the Gaelic definition of Tartar, the older the book the better, you can find a reference to an Irish soldier who was out in battle in the Far East. Mainstream history says that the Celtic people came from the east, from Mongolia, and settled into Ireland, and we get this from the Romans. They try to describe these Celtic people as savages. I suspect that this is all a part of the twisted history given to us by the manipulators of history. This is a lie told in order to hide where the Greeks and Romans got their sciences from. The Greeks and Romans were made up by the controllers. It's not hard to find out. Josephus tells you what happened. Basically, Josephus, one of our most famous historians, was a traitor. He was a traitor that helped these parasites take over. He was rewarded with riches and high status. The Roman Wars is really the takeover of the old society, or Old Irish Church of Iessa. Roman history and Greek history is a fraudulent excuse to explain the ancient history of when all these ancient architectures were developed. They couldn't let people know that these cities were really developed by another civilization. So the only justification is to make up a fraudulent history by literally adding thousands of years to the timeline so that Rome would be seen as more glorious of an empire. And who would get the credit? It was the takeover of Rome allowed for all the scripture to be forged and for the Bible to literally be stolen by the people who developed it. For Greek, you can see that the ancient writers wrote of ancient civilizations and wrote on the Hyperboreans. Then Origin against Celsus comes out, and Origin trashes all the old writings of the ancient Greeks, and basically says that the antiquity of the Jews is of more importance. We don't even have the writings of Celsus, because it was destroyed. All books of the ancient world, those that were not published by the new church, were destroyed. Just imagine how much knowledge was lost in the legendary burning of the Library of Alexandria. When I say Greek and Rome, I'm talking about the history that we are fed. The story that we know of the Romans being these amazing builders and the Greeks being the foundation for rational thinking and science is but a front. These cities are of a much more recent time. We can agree that their societies are post-Atlantean, correct? What we shall soon see is that these really are the cities of the advanced global culture, and we're talking after Atlantis. Shout out to Martin. He has a video on the Congo where he shows that there is this advanced civilization of white people living in Africa, and it looks much different than what we're taught to believe. There were many cities and lakes that are currently not there, and many castles like that of fairy tales. There was another global civilization after Atlantis. How else do you explain the common architecture around the world? Also, if what mainstream history says is true, then why do many languages have their roots in Gaelic and Ancient Irish? It's because after Atlantis, the knowledge of civilization was spread out to the east, a movement from west to east. They even crossed into America, developing cities on both coasts. The law was created from a global church, the Church of Iessa. Quote, in their great missionary pilgrimage, they circled the globe in order to give religion and knowledge of God to the different races of mankind. They also established priesthoods and gave alphabets to those who were unenlightened in such matters up to that time. Ireland is the country in which the arts and sciences were first discovered and developed. To this country the Greeks applied the term ogia, a term which was never given but to the very ancient, and it is from the Irish, Aryans, that the Greeks traced their descent, Donnelly's Atlantis. From Conor McDarry, quote, there is no mistaking the monuments left by the Irish, who were once the rulers and masters of the whole earth. Their rule embraced all countries, it was worldwide. Ireland was the first mistress of the seas. It was the first and only worldwide empire which was ever known, for it was spiritual. It was greater in extent than Persian, Greek, Roman, or Mughal ever attained to. The remains of their works, wherever they found, bear an unmistakable similarity in shape and character. They are huge, immense, and conceived and carried out on a plan so extensive that it awes the mind of man today. These remains extend from Ireland along the Atlantic coast of Europe to Africa, along the Mediterranean Sea to Egypt, India, China, Java, Tahiti, and the Caroline Islands in the South Pacific Ocean. On the American continent we find the Round Tower near Newport, RI, which bespeaks its Irish origin, and the great pyramidal mounds of the Ohio and Mississippi valleys. Also, the ruined temples of the Yucatan and Mexico, and similar remains in South America are all evidence of their handiwork. All owe their origin to the same source, and they established beyond any doubt that the Irish were the first real discoverers of America and that they established civilization on this western continent. It was tradition founded on the fact which gave hope and encouragement to later adventurers. The very name of God among the Indians of our country was an Irish name derived from those missionaries and explorers centuries before Christopher Columbus or Eric the Red were born. One of the Irish names of God is Man, and Manitha is the Irish word for holy. The Indian name for God was Manatau, the Holy One. The Indians also had another name for God, and this again was Irish. It was Manabasha, the sun god. It is a compound word with the root word man, holy, and basha, of the cows, the bull, virtually the same as Baal, the Irish sun god. So the name signifies the holy life giver, or holy creator. Anyone who knows the Celtic tongue will recognize this fact at once, and so will all competent students of philology. Most people are not aware of this because it is suppressed history, or people think this is some type of nationalism. I'm not even Irish, this has nothing to do with that. There are many legends from cultures all around the world talking about white red-haired giants who possess advanced technology. The most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history. George Orwell. For instance, red-haired, bearded, feathered god Quetzalcoatl, a carving in the Olmec capital referred to as Uncle Sam with a large nose and beard, appearing largely Semitic, who was said to have arrived from an island home across the sea that disappeared after a great flood. I have a video on the Irish connections to the Phoenicians, but they're not the same thing. The Phoenicians are like the dark cult that came from the Celtic Druids that then developed into the worship of Baal or Saturn, presumably the one who was causing all these cataclysms to happen. Basically, these cataclysms started happening because the gods became angry. Wisdom had been brought down to the earth, and unity was achieved on the material realm. This is the story according to the Gnostic Gospels. There was a split between the Old Church, the Church of Iessa, and the New Church, the worship of Baal or materialism. And also, I want to make a distinction between the Old Sun and the New Sun, Saturn. The Old Church was a utopia based on the old golden age of Atlantis. It was based on natural law and for the pursuit of wisdom. The Church of Iessa still praised the sun, but it was an analogy for the beauty of the invisible God. The new Church of Baal developed into the Roman Empire. The confusion is we date the Phoenicians to about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago in mainstream history. The Phoenicians are just a cover name for a specific branch of ancient Jews which aren't that ancient at all. They are from a recent time, possibly 500 years ago. This new church in secret worships a demon god, the mad god of the Bible, Jehovah, or Saturn, Baal. But as they grew to power, they took over the media, the press, and began promoting the exoteric understanding of the Bible for the masses, as well as the fraudulent atheist viewpoint of the world that completely denied God called science. The fraudulent Church of Rome, controlled by they wanted to worship the God causing the catastrophe in order to subdue the effects. This is the story over the Battle of Jerusalem. The old Jews were replaced by the new Jews. I'm going to stop right there for a second and slow down, because if you're new to this, you might be like, oh, what is he talking about? Especially the people who cringe at the idea of shadow controllers or the Illuminati. Why would the Phoenicians or whatever want to take over the world by stealing this church? Because this old church was the spiritual power of the old world. They traveled across the globe, civilizing the entire world, as I referenced in Donnelly's Atlantis. If you buy the story of Atlantis, then Donnelly's Atlantis was one of the first major books on Atlantis. Whoever dominates the church rules the world. Literally. So when I say Phoenician, I have a different definition than the mainstream, and it's not a simple sentence, so bear with me. The Phoenicians is a cover name for the advanced maritime culture of the ancient past. It was created by this new Church of Rome to hide the history of how the ancient Church of Iessa became what we now call the Jews. It's a little bit of both histories, that's why it's so confusing. The Phoenicians were the first to develop language, but this is really the story of the ancient Irish. The worship of Baal and materialism doesn't come until a later time. The Phoenician history begins with the Irish, and then a parasitic thinking took place, and they began to worship Baal. I'm saying that the Phoenicians developed around 500 years ago, while there were many other cities and civilizations developed by the Irish that then developed into their own cultures. For the Phoenicians, it's the Irish developing into the Jews. Let's move Atlantis closer. There's an ancient manuscript known as Oretta Linda that speaks of these times. The reason we don't hear about this manuscript is because it's said to be a fraud. The only real reason mainstream academics believes this is because they simply can't accept the dating. Oretta Linda dates Atlantis to be 2,000 to 4,000 years ago, which would move many cultures to a far more recent time. Regardless of the dating, this is still interesting to find that Atlantis is referenced as Atlant, completely separate from Plato. We also have to keep in mind the phantom time hypothesis, or Fomenko's work. If that's the case, then Atlantis may have been as recent as 1,000 to 2,000 years ago. Okay, so back to how the Irish became the Phoenician, Venetian, Roman Church. Okay, so why this takeover? Or what's the motive of the Illuminati, right? Why take over this church if they enlightened the ancient world after the fall of Atlantis? From Connor McDarry, quote, "The fact of his holding such autocratic power led to the assumption of attributes of divinity in order to hold the people in awe of him. The qualities of divinity we have seen attributed to the rulers in our day. In Russia, China, Japan, and not so long ago in England, the belief was held that any disease which would not yield to the treatment of a physician could be cured by a mere touch of the king's hand or even his garment. The head of the Irish State Church held the supreme pontifical power in Europe until challenged first by Persia, then by Greece, and later by Rome, who, when a favorable time arrived for her to assert her independence, set up jointly a church and state for herself. For let it be known, Rome was at one time a colony of Ireland. The name Rome is a compound of two Irish words, ro, meaning before, and om, meaning body, earth, or grave. But in its mythic meaning, it is made to signify before heaven, ro, and earth, orn, the two together meaning heaven and earth, hence the eternal city Rome. The river of Rome, the Tiber, also bears an Irish name. It derives its name from Tuber, the Irish word for a well or spring of water. Hence, the Tiber is the spring water river, as the poet Longfellow truly says, "Their names are on your waters, and ye may not wash them out." The fact is that Ireland was the first power that colonized along both sides of the Mediterranean Sea, and therefore the colonies came from the west instead of the east, as our astute Roman and British historians would have us believe. And the world has believed it up to now, but the deception, when once exposed, is too clear for anyone to be deceived by it. Investigators have followed this false clue sent out from this source and found nothing in the east to support this claim that the Aryans immigrated from the east and colonized towards the west. The real and true evidence points just in the opposite direction. The American Encyclopedia Art Ethnology, quoted in Donnelly's Atlantis, says, Bonfrey L. Geiger and other students of the ancient Indo-European languages have recently advanced the opinion that the original home of the Indo-European races must be sought in Europe, because their stock of words is rich in the names of plants and animals and contains names of seasons that are not found in tropical countries or anywhere else in Asia. Mueller says, the nations who are comprehended under the common appellation of Indo-European, the Hindus, the Persians, the Celts, Germans, Romans, Greeks, and Slavs, do not only share the same words and the same grammar, slightly modified in each country, they seem to have likewise preserved a mass of popular traditions which had grown up before they left their common home. Donnelly's Atlantis. In the book from 1842, Etruria Celtica, Etruscan literature and antiquities investigated, or the language of the ancient and illustrious people compared and identified with the Iberno-Celtic and both shown to be Phoenician, the author makes many etymological connections with the ancient Irish language and covers symbols and Etruscan coins that are common Irish emblems. Quote, I have examined and endeavored to place the language in a true light by demonstrating its analogies and removing the erroneous notion of its affinity with Welsh, Cornish, and Basque Breton. An accident induced its comparison with Etruscan, which indeed has answered Jogson's anticipations and expectations by opening great discoveries in Irish antiquity, and clearing up the obscurity which hid the origin of the early peopling, not only of Ireland and the British Islands, but of all Celtic Europe, and deducing their origin from the great civilized, commercial, navigating people of the world, who before the birth of Greek or Roman greatness traversed the seas and enjoyed the uncontrolled empire of the deep. This isn't something that I just came up with, and if you bear with me, this will tie many different pieces of the puzzle together. In order to understand this alternative history, a base must be established. There's so much more that I could say on this subject, but the question that I hear a lot is, why would the powers that be want to control the world? One can't even begin to understand this because we're fed a false history from two main empires, Rome and Britain. Okay, so the Phoenicians are basically a small group that began with the Church of Iessa and the Black Sea. This developed into multiple sects, one being the Gnostics, and one of the others were parasites like the Church of Baal. The Church of Baal developed into the Jews, which really is at a much more recent time. Those that took over Rome. Okay, so how is this relevant to ancient tech? So the story of electricity comes from these people who took over Rome. These people purposefully hid technologies of recent times, and we've been fed stories of accidental scientific discoveries when we only had the knowledge of electricity for the past 200 years. The ancients were quite aware of magnets as they form naturally. It would be quite possible to create a powerful current if they possessed powerful batteries, which they did. Copper was widely used by these ancient cultures, so what's so baffling about recent cultures possessing some type of advanced EMF technology? The pyramids are generating a torsion field that is accessing multiple planes of existence, which in turn creates energy. This energy can transform consciousness to access other realities, but can also be harnessed into physical objects. Aether technologies. Aether technologies of the past did exist, and it ran on the energy that was around all of us. It didn't need to be paid for, and it wasn't the property of any company. Now remember, there were still cultures that followed the natural law, and these were the remnants of the Church of Iessa, which had cities and strongholds all around the world, including the Americas. This is what we're referencing as Tartaria, the leftover Church of Iessa, the original builders of all these magnificent spiritual architectures. But we also have the Jews, who came over to America because this Phoenician cult happened near the Black Sea, and according to the Book of Mormon, these Jews were trying to escape the war going on. So they fled, following some strange ancient tech called the Liahona, following their way to America, meaning these people were not of the Church of Iessa, but of a later time when many cults were developing. Were they good or bad? That's another story, but they ended up landing in Haiti and South America, helping develop the Aztec and Mayan civilizations. The Book of Mormon also talks about how this tribe of Jews who came to America met another people who were advanced and already accustomed to their language and ways. This is referencing the civilizations already in existence in America. This is around 500 years ago. These Jews were not sent over by the new Church of Rome, but were mostly people who tried to escape the confusion that was going on in all the war. The story of Christopher Columbus is the story of how the Church of Rome through Spain rediscovered the Americas. While all these wars are happening, cults and different sects are being formed. There is constant cataclysm going on, and a constant strive for power from multiple different parties. So much knowledge was lost, and the knowledge of terra firma became just a myth and legend. I'm referring to this new Church of Rome as really just a corporation of the Phoenician Baal cult, purple royal family. They forged most of our history, and the real Romans were one of these advanced cultures of the Church of Iessa before the cataclysm and parasitic takeover. Now, in order to take control, many devices were developed in order to dominate and control, and they tell us specifically what those devices are. The symbols in almost all the publications from Britain and Rome have strange emblems and symbols that reference domination and power. The fasces is an electromagnetic weapon used by the royals to take over. Just think about it, a bundle of rods would make an axe unusable. Quote, it was Etruscan before Roman, so it has a long history. When Rome began to transition to authoritarianism, the fasces became a symbol of that. But it was long held to be a symbol of the power of Rome and the will of the people. The fasces were a series of bound rods with an axe head within them, and were carried by lictors, or the bodyguards of ancient Rome. Wherever an important elected leader went, lictors followed. By this, the rod of the lictors, the fasces, became a symbol of power in government and law. So they are trying to play it as if they were really using these weapons for protection or for some type of status. Fasces are electromagnetic guns.
Now, this same magnetic field is much more potent if it operates on an aluminium sheet instead of on the mercury. The reason for this is that aluminium is about 40 times more conducting than mercury. Of course, I could make it more potent still if I could put some steel behind the aluminium to improve the magnetic circuit. But instead of this, I'm going to change the shape of the motor. Can you imagine that the two sides were bent up? Having imagined that to be done, let's make a machine that looks like that. We should find that the windings are very simple, being only a row of coils like this. The moving part is a steel rod with a copper sleeve around it. We put it in the end of the tube and fire. Well, that wasn't a bad shot, was it? This electromagnetic gun seems to have taken us right back to the start with our rifle. It looks as if we can make an electromagnetic model of nearly anything. We've certainly managed to reproduce the gun.
Quote, "The fasces has been all over American symbology from the very beginning. You'll find it in dozens, if not hundreds of places around America, mostly in government institutions. The House of Representatives used the fasces to represent its master-at-arms from 1789 onward. Its use is quite common in reference to law, and was commonly seen alongside things like scales and statues of the blind justice. It looks like a pile of twigs attached to an axe could be one of the deadliest weapons known to mankind. The elite know what the symbol means, it's so we know who is in power. To fully cover how the fasces worked, we have to talk about atmospheric conditions of the past, the aether, and magnetic flips. The magnetic ether was more powerful in the past, and it fluctuates leading to cataclysmic events, and it can even be isolated. The rapture already happened. When energy in these fields build up, they flip and reset, causing all sorts of phenomena like anti-gravity. Devices were developed to access this built-up energy in the atmosphere, and these are referred to as aether devices. They are free energy devices designed to collect the built-up energy in the aether. Magic was also more possible, as our thoughts permeate the aether. Our thoughts are now just subtle vibrations only visible to the clairvoyant, or even those who, with close relations, have the common occurrence of thinking the same thought at the same time. The common phrase, jinx. The Phoenicians of the new church didn't fully take over till about 100 years ago, so there was a period of time where many cities were still not owned by them. The cities that remain, like I said, are the remnants of the Church of Iessa, like Tartaria, and they were using advanced technologies. These cities include LA, San Francisco, New York, St. Petersburg, Paris, London, and many others. They had an aether lighting system, an aircraft system using blimps and other flying vehicles. They possessed free energy that was given wirelessly through different building generators. That is what our churches are. They generate power and energy similar to the pyramids using torsion fields, through symmetry and acoustics, and through the use of a transmitter. The transmission can be sent for everyday application like lighting and heating, which then powered steam. We only learn of the history of the Phoenician cult of Baal, so rediscover the sciences filled with fraudulent characters and a complete distorted lie of a timeline. Many of the accidental discovery stories of electricity are not accidental. It's just a story made up to explain a found or stolen technology. It sounds crazy, but there are references and myths from around the world talking about this aether technology. Antiquity and lore. Irish. In ancient Irish literature, Cuchulainn possessed a divine magical spear with supernatural powers. But Cuchulainn was not the only one who possessed an extraordinary spear. The god Lu had a similar weapon, which was called the Invincible Spear, or the Spear of Victory, and it had properties similar to the magical sword of Nuada, Sword of Light. When thrown, it momentarily hit its target. This weapon was one of the lost four treasures of the Tuatha De Danann. In Greek, the Antikythera mechanism is an ancient Greek analog computer. It was used to predict astronomical positions and eclipses. Zeus's lightning bolt, aka Thunderbolt, aka Master Bolt, is the signature weapon and symbol of the power for the Olympian god of thunder, Zeus. It is said to be the most powerful and feared weapon on the earth and in the heavens. Agita, regarded as the weapon that Hercules used to kill the eagle Aquila that perpetually gnawed Prometheus's liver. The Greeks invented a novelty device called the Aeolipile. This was a small brass ball with 2 nozzles which was suspended on a stand and filled with water. Lighting a fire under the ball caused the water to boil and steam to shoot out the nozzles, spinning the ball. It was a miniature steam engine. Vedic. In the Vedas, electricity is mentioned by the name Indra. The word Vidyuta also is used. We also find mention in Agastya regarding the mention of generation of electricity and constructing electrical batteries. The relevant reference can be quoted as under, quote, "Place a well-cleaned copper plate in an earthenware vessel. Cover it first by copper sulfate and then by moist sawdust. After that, put a mercury amalgamated zinc sheet on top of the sawdust to avoid polarization. The contact will produce an energy known by the twin name of Mitra Varuna. Water will be split by this current into Pranavayu or Udanavayu, a chain of which 100 jars is said to give a very effective force." We also have mention of the Vimanas, or ancient flying aircrafts of the past. Nordic, Gugnir, Old Norse Gugnir swaying, pronounced Gugnir, is the name of the mighty spear that belongs to the old god Odin. Maybe by swaying they mean it was emitting vibrational waves that sway or rhythmically move back and forth. In the recorded Norse myths, Gugnir is the weapon most consistently and powerfully associated with Odin. Odin and Zeus are similar but not the same. Odin is the father of thunder, or Thor. He is the god of wisdom, poetry, death, divination, and magic. The king of Asgard, or Aether. Oriental. Aztec, Zayacuatl, a lightning-like weapon born of Huitzilopochtli. Kunkankin, a chakram of great power wielded in Taoist mythology by Nezha, a mythological figure often depicted as a young handsome boy wearing clothes similar to a lotus. He has 2 wheels with flames attached to his feet and golden ankle rings. The fasces was not an axe but an advanced technology of the gods. Wikipedia even says that the fasces was first developed by the Etruscans. Well, they're literally just the early Irish. In this depiction, we can see a Phoenician Statue of Liberty with a floating device in her hand. This is another electromagnetic item used by the controllers. In Vedic literature, it's called a Vajra, a weapon of Indra, or the god of thunder and symbol for electricity. You can also see the Caduceus, which is a symbol for the god and man. Those with this symbol are the god rays that have been electrified by the Kundalini energies, the physical and metaphysical being, the Aether being. It's obvious that electromagnetic Aether devices and electronic weapons are mentioned in a variety of different lore, and many who are new to this subject are willing to accept that this was possible in Atlantis. But why isn't it possible that a recent civilization had this technology? 250 years ago, great cities of America were not under rule by these new rulers. We didn't start expanding out west until the 19th century, because there was a great civilization living in the west of America. You'll see the same pattern with old buildings not having construction photos. And if you do, it's usually very staged, or it even could be faked. Did you know that one of the earliest photoshopped images is from the 1850s? Yes, meaning literally this is a composite of over 30 photographs. I wonder why we don't ever hear about this. Think about how much that can be faked with this. They had the ability to composite multiple different footages together in the 1900s. Let's look at some right footage. People still literally think this is real. Okay, so let's take a look at this, the official flight. So what they're going to do is they're going to pull out the plane from the hangar. And I do think that this can get some movement on the ground, but I refuse to believe that they actually got this to lift off and land, because if they did, they would do it in one consistent footage. But you're going to see there's some definite trickery going on. So they push it out and they get it ready for takeoff, okay? And then there's this crowd, and this is where the pretty clever compositing takes place, okay? So here it is taken off, supposedly, right? Bam, a clip changes, okay? So there's the first change. It's not showing you a consistent takeoff. Now, what they did is there's 2 footages going on, okay? So you have to understand there's a backplate, which means they shot this footage right here with this group of people without anything in the sky or this plane, right, supposedly taking off. They took the footage with nothing here, and then later in a studio or whatever, they have a model that's very similar to this larger model of a plane. And they basically have it where there's this white background behind the toy model, like typical Hollywood trickery, to composite over this illusion that this plane's actually taking off. But what you'll notice as we go further, as the plane's flying around, as it comes around, you'll notice that these people aren't even paying attention to it. So they start walking away. Now this clip right now is a backplate, meaning they shot this at a different time. These people are not even paying attention to one of the first flights of an airplane. They're not even paying attention. So watch, it's actually going to come around, and this guy has his head down. Basically, you can tell that just based on head orientation, they're not even looking at this thing. And actually, if I go back to right here, you can tell based on perspective that this is not actually accurate. Look at the speed of these propellers. So why can't we just look at it? Why is it being weird? What's with this camera movement? So there you go. They're not even paying attention to it. The perspective is off. They won't show the landing. And yeah, this is just Hollywood. So it might not be 100% noticeable in this one, but there's actually even more noticeable footage. Okay, so we're gonna look at some footage that's a little bit less known, but it's so obvious how fake it is. So they're doing the same thing. They're pulling out the airplane, and they're pulling it out on horses. They get the propellers going. But here's the thing, it's the same theme where you're not gonna see a consistent footage from takeoff to landing. You won't, but what you will see is some fakery. So here we go. So let's go to, here's the engine that they're using or whatever. So here's the takeoff, but you won't see it because of the horrible footage. So they're gonna switch to this part when it's ducking. This is not a real person. You can actually tell it's not. So when you look at it, what this is early compositing. This is a toy model with literally dolls on it, and they are ducking it up and down on a white canvas, or it could be a variety of different mediums, but then they basically have two footages, and then they are compositing it together. They had this art form basically mastered in the 1850s, so what makes it so impossible that they could do this with footage? Well, they did. That's what Hollywood literally is. I mean, it's just so obvious. Old pictures of cities with amazing buildings and architecture, but people are on horseback, or the roads are made of dirt. That doesn't make sense. I'm not gonna go into it here, but the way they say airplanes work is complete BS. The engines are high technology from the past. BS stories. Electricity and photography are thought to be recent discoveries, but if you look into the history of photography, it happened by accident, and the same goes for electricity. Most of these discoveries have some strange story that really doesn't make all that much sense. Okay, so let's go over the BS story of electricity. In the 1700s, Hawksby is credited with discovering that he could build up a visual electric charge inside a rotating vacuum sealed glass sphere filled with mercury. He was an apprentice to Isaac Newton and wasn't even the first one to come up with this idea. There's this older scientist named Otto von Guericke who's credited for developing the first vacuum and experimenting with electrostatic phenomena. Notice all the symbolism and how this is just another scientist out of Italy. These are either lies or the story of how those that relearned the sciences, and many inventions had their history completely fabricated, assisted by a fake scientist created for the benefit of Britain and Rome. Our modern perception of electricity comes from the famous Benjamin Franklin, where supposedly he discovered that lightning was electricity. Some people think he discovered electricity, and that's not true. None of these people did. The ancients were well aware of it. They just perceived it in a different way. Now, Leyden jars are said to be the first basic battery, the first means of accumulating and preserving electric charge in large quantities that could be discharged at the experimenter's will. We went over how the ancients were well aware of electricity and charges. Many know about the Baghdad battery and the Egyptian light bulb, but the name electricity itself comes from the Greeks, who were well aware of action at a distance, or static electricity. If you guys watched that new video on the Conspiracy RS channel, he showed some diagrams of old buildings from the lightning rod conference in 1882. It goes to show that they definitely have thought about this. A device on top of the houses that would collect free energy from the atmosphere. Then, the energy is stored in a large Leyden jar. This means that they had multiple devices in the common home that could function off of electricity. The mainstream will admit that the ancients had knowledge of static electricity all the way back to the earliest civilizations, but it remained merely an interesting and mystifying phenomenon without a theory to explain its behavior and often confused with magnetism. They did have a theory, it's just called aether, that just doesn't work with their model because it's a non-physical substance, and the only thing that can exist in this universe is observable, established data, but that couldn't be further from the truth. So the ancients knew about static electricity for thousands of years, had many different legends and lore talking about the great magical weapons of electricity, and they just never thought of a good theory, huh? They just didn't think of a practical use. Well, I guess that's it. No, the Greeks and Romans knew about steam generators, and they knew about the practical uses of electricity. So they just have a toy steam engine on their desk while they're building some of the most complex structures of the ancient world? I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. But what's even more ridiculous is the idea that you go from settling in horses and wagon in America, and then within 20 years you're building massive dome churches. It doesn't make any sense. You guys should check out that new video on John Levi's channel called Awakening 2020. He covers how many of the buildings of the Philadelphia Electric Company are being pushed as if they created them in the 1920s. These magnificent structures were then repurposed as power stations, possibly attempting to use the technology already inside of these structures. Did you know that the Invention Secrecy Act of 1951 is a body of United States federal law designed to prevent disclosure of new inventions and technologies that, in the opinion of selected federal agencies, present a possible threat to national security of the United States? There are old pictures of strange power lines without cables, old photos of buildings with antennae on top of the roof. The andirons in front of many old fireplaces may have been some type of etheric heating device for warming the interiors of large rooms, or it may be much more advanced than ever imagined. Some of these fireplaces could be etheric demoleculizers that could transfer matter into the etheric realm and back like a gateway. If the largest library in the ancient world could be burned to the ground, then that explains the amount of manipulation that's really occurred. Everything has been placed into the property of the parasites, and anything that hints towards ancient history or ancient advanced technology has been systematically removed and replaced with forgeries. That's all we're fed from the start of the Greeks are Jewish forgeries from the start of Origen against Celsus, where Origen claims that the ancestry of the Jews are of the utmost antiquity, where Celsus, like other ancient Greek philosophers, all wrote about ancient ancestors of the Hyperboreans, and how advanced these people were. In more recent times, the civilizations that built the great cities of America were an advanced race of people who were larger in stature and had mastered the art of electricity. On the video of ancient bald white giants, there are native legends that specifically refer to this. They built the railroads and developed into a steampunk-like realm filled with amazing gadgets and flying machines. These people were breatharian, absorbing the ether for sustenance and did not require bathrooms for the architecture. Some type of EMF outburst destroyed the civilization, whether it was the technology they were using that ended up building up and causing a magnetic flip, or if it was natural, the gravity was then reversed, taking all the people and the machines, even the water, and then resetting again, leaving no trace of people, and when the water drops, it causes mud flood. Or it could have been by intention using one of the devices of the gods, like the fasces. You don't think the ancients thought of weather manipulation? Maybe in the steampunk world, it was very cloudy and smoggy, electrosmog, and they would create artificial clouds of sulfur that would then build up a static electric charge. In the Conspiracy RS video, there is this old depiction of fireworks, and there's something very strange about it. There are all sorts of electric disturbances in the atmosphere. What if this was by design, because it was how the technology functioned? The lightning rods on top of the houses or these different power stations would absorb these electrical charges in the atmosphere and then store it for later use. Now I think originally everything was aether-based technology, but in more recent ages, especially Tartarian cities taken over by the Phoenicians, they needed to rediscover how these technologies worked. So the filthy ages of New York and London are a time where they were repopulating these abandoned cities and people were eating animals and producing massive amounts of waste. And this led to all sorts of problems because the cities weren't really designed for all this waste. So they burned the poop and added other chemicals to create these fake clouds that I'm talking about, these static electric clouds. The reason why this has been covered up is because this technology worked on free energy, and all the people had access to devices with infinite free power. Remember, the Phoenicians were a giant corporation. They needed to make a buck of electricity, which should be free. So after they tried to use the Tartarian technology to create a new society. There was again more cataclysms of mud flood, and so they decided to not use the atmospheric devices, so they reset history and bring in thousands of orphans, and that's exactly what happened with Nikola Tesla. And we hear the story of how our modern population rediscovered how to implement electricity on a city scale. The scientists Galvani, Volta, Davy, Faraday, Maxwell are other orphanage scientists that went to these mainstream colleges in the Empire of Britain or Rome, and these people were again trying to rediscover these lost secrets after all these cataclysms. It's either orphans promoted by the state or church, fraudulent or made-up people with few images, or these writings are of another civilization, literally, and they just translated it and assigned a name and a fake person. You know, and there's something very weird about the transatlantic cable story. Also note that it looks very similar to the fasces. Maybe this is some old tech and the engravings are just something done more recently. Mainstream science claims that the voltaic pile was the first electrical battery that could continuously provide an electric current to a circuit. It is the first battery that could provide a direct current for this new church civilization. The University of Padua is full of fraud, and many of the scientists in this electricity history are a part of this college, especially during the supposed 18th century. What's so sketchy about them? Well, it all starts with Aristotle. Watch Tartaria Part 3, I talk about how Aristotle in Venice and how this whole philosophy took over. So these scientists out of these universities are Freemasons basically, or they have an agenda. Mostly that these technologies were found and stolen, and individuals were tasked with re-engineering this technology, such as Volta, or just completely made up from the beginning. The only science that we see is that published by the new anti-church of Venice, Rome, Phoenicia. We get completely made up stories like the Gilded Age deception, that these millionaires just wanted to start building European-style mansions in the US. Now, it wasn't until Albert Einstein that we had the ether removed from the scientific sphere. Before, such as in Maxwell's equations, the ether was suggested as the source for the phenomena, the luminiferous ether. The reason they say the ether doesn't exist, and they know this without a doubt, is because of the Michelson-Morley experiment. It proved that the ether didn't exist. It did no such thing. They just can't find a way to record it, and so according to the atomist, they can't observe it. It's not real. If I can't put it into some type of measurement, then it doesn't exist. So dreams don't exist? What about love, or ambition, or imagination? These things can't be recorded, but they're real. Does that mean they don't exist? Of course not. So how did this experiment prove anything? It didn't. It literally didn't. What we have today is modern science thinks gravity is somehow a function of particles in quantum mechanics. Modern physics says gravitons cause gravity, and that light is a particle or has some type of emission. It doesn't. Light is just a disturbance of the ether, just like matter is, but to a much higher degree. Atoms are just empty space, so how does matter have solidity? Quantum physics can't figure out why electrons switch between a particle or a wave based on the observer. Most of these concepts aren't even understood by the people who came up with them. The whole intention from the beginning is just to promote this Aristotle agenda. Even Nikola Tesla said that Albert Einstein was an idiot. And yeah, till this day, modern physics still lacks an explanation for action at a distance, light, and magnetism. They don't explain the phenomena, they just give it a term in an equation, but that doesn't really explain anything though. Conclusion. We've covered several different topics on the channel covering these concepts, and it becomes to become clear that there is an agenda to control information and suppress truth. What if Atlantis was at a much more recent age than ever imagined? After the fall of Atlantis, survivors landed in Ireland and northern Spain, preserving the foundations of the Golden Age civilization. These ancient ways were then carried across the world to re-educate those who suffered from the Great Cataclysm. This resulted in the new global church, the Church of Iessa, establishing major cities around the world, becoming the first maritime power. Then, a swap happened. This is the Phoenician takeover. So it was to take over Rome, and the quest for world domination begins. At this time, many cataclysms were taking place, assisting in the process of the evil Phoenician takeover. But before these cataclysms, there were many advanced civilizations all around the world, from the Far East all the way to America. These civilizations possess advanced ether-based technologies, were of a larger stature, and possessed a different digestive system that could purely live off the ether in nature. Slowly but surely, these Phoenician parasites took over, starting in Rome, then slowly moving to Paris and London. These became the Dark Filthy Ages, and they possessed technology that would extract charge from fake clouds created from burned feces. This led to steampunk technologies in the recent past. These technologies created dirty electricity, which resulted in a buildup in the environment, creating another magnetic reset. More mud floods, another reset, ghost cities, and the repopulation of the world's major cities. The rulers had to start over in re-engineering this technology. Some technologies were just found and false histories needed to be created, such as the airplane and photography. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. There's so much more to cover, and we have a lot of cool stuff coming soon, so stay tuned. See you guys next time, and may our minds be unveiled.
Let go of everything you think to be true. Relax the mind and ask the question, do I truly understand what this reality is?